Hi, I'm Lucy McTier. I'm a portrait artist. For about 30 years I've been working in this field, and I wanted to show a little bit about how to block in and begin an oil sketch. Typically, I like to do it in paint, so I'm using a solution of turpentine with a little bit of burnt umber and some ultramarine blue mixed together to make a nice brown. And I'm just blocking in areas that I want to use as reference points. It acts like a map to me so that I can go back in and put more details as I'm painting. It also is helpful because it allows me to center the image where I want it without getting too involved in details and ending up painting myself off the page. So one of the things that you're going to find as you begin to do this is sometimes you're going to mess up, and that's okay. You can take a rag and just pull off where you've made mistakes. And in this case, you'll see that you can paint over areas that you've already begun to establish and either define them by darkening them, or you can lighten them up. Here I'm getting a sense of where the hair falls across or around the face. And I'm doing a little bit of shading and defining where the chin and the throat are in the painting. This would be considered an alla prima painting or portrait. Alla prima meaning at first touch. And it's different from many of the portraits that I do because most of the portraits are something that I've worked on for many weeks. This is going to be accomplished in about an hour and a half. And it's all done in one setting, in one sitting. So right here I'm trying to get a sense of form, and I'll be able to put in more detail as I go from there. I like to sketch in the axis of the head so that the eyes are on the same plane and the nose and the mouth are also turning in the right direction. Occasionally I'll hold the photograph up in front of where I'm working and move it back and forth to get a sense of whether or not I have the correct dimensions and proportions. I use a bright golden taklon brush to sketch in most of the time. Sometimes I'll use a round brush, depending on how large I'm going to be working. These are fairly broad strokes, so I'm using a bright brush. It's probably about a size 6, I would guess. One thing about sketching with paint is you get an immediate gratification, but also you're building on something that as you work, you feel confident that you'll be able to use this as groundwork for further detail. I like to show the area where the eyes are going to fall, including most of the socket that shows with the upper and the lower lid. It's important to get a shape as you're working without worrying too much about the detail, because like I said, it acts as a map to further your understanding of the area. And as you go into to define it better, you've got an area to work from. I try to make sure that the corners of the eyes are approximately an eye's width apart. Even though I've been painting for 30 years, it still is a temptation to make the eyes too close together and sometimes too far apart. So I have to use that gauge as I'm working. And the corners of the eyes typically turn down, and I'll have to make sure that I'm doing that. And as I paint in the iris, I'm paying attention also to the negative space to the right and to the left of the iris. And the pupil, generally the eyelid comes right to the top of the pupil and covers a third of the iris. It's sometimes easy to get too involved in trying to paint around iris, and you don't pay attention to where the eyelid falls. You have to look at the eye as similar to a camera in that it is letting a certain amount of light in. That's why when we're frightened, our eyelids open very wide and you see more white around our eyes, because our system is basically trying to allow as much light as possible, as much information as possible. I don't have a particular process that I go through. Almost every portrait I do, I work in a different area at a different time. It's just whatever hits my fancy at the time. But I have learned not to get too involved in painting eyelashes, because inevitably I'll end up painting a top lid especially several times, and if I've already painted eyelashes and then I go in and have to paint an eyelid or in between the eyelashes, it's almost impossible. So I keep the shapes of the eyelashes very simple until almost toward the end of the painting. And here I'm trying to show how the shadows are cast from the top lid.